Welcome to the practice section of Module 1. In this section, we'll focus on the quality to develop as a practitioner of compassion inquiry, on the skills we want to excel in, and on the stepping stones in the line of inquiry. We'll start with an overview of the 9 qualities that are important in the therapist and qualities we want to develop within ourselves. The first is empathetic abiding presence and self-awareness, and trusting in our gut feelings, authenticity, curiosity, confidence, non-judgment and acceptance, compassion, and playfulness. And the quality that we are focusing on in Module 1 is empathetic abiding presence. This means that we're aware and really present with the client for the entire interaction. We give them our full attention. We maintain that bond and that responsiveness. We open ourselves up and sense in our body what we're feeling as they speak and as we listen between the words to what they're saying. And we offer unconditional love as much as we're capable of, understanding and acceptance. We mirror, validate, and accept their feelings. We don't make them wrong. We take them in and accept that they're valid. Throughout the session, we maintain calmness and equanimity, and we become the empathetic witness. In a sense, we become the person that's holding them, and that person who they were missing when they were young children. We allow what wants to be said to arise within them and within ourselves. So we create space for that. And we acknowledge within ourselves what's happening in our own bodies, what's happening to us on an emotional level. When it's appropriate, we'll say something about that. Because the more we don't acknowledge it, the bigger it gets. And we are authentic in that way. Here's a quote from Dr. Janice Phelps about what it means to have empathetic abiding presence. She says, components of empathetic abiding presence range from composure, evenly suspended attention, mindfulness, empathetic listening, doing by non-doing. So we're not trying to fix the client. We're not trying to tell them what to do. Responding to distress with calmness and equanimity. Because the client is very susceptible to the mood and voice of the therapist. So that's what we want to keep in mind with this quality of developing this empathetic abiding presence. Now we'll look at the skills that we need to practice compassion inquiry. The skills that Dr. Gabor Mate models for us. And we'll focus on a few of these skills in Module 1. There are a total of 22 skills that we've identified. The first one is to create safety for the client. The second is to attune to the client. The third is to invite openness through our presence, through our receptivity. To encourage authentic feeling in the client by being authentic ourselves, and to give the client lots of space, an opportunity for spaciousness for things to arise. To recognize in ourselves when we're triggered, and then to acknowledge that if necessary. To listen, really pay attention to the voice, the verbal language and speech patterns of the client. To notice their body language and breathing patterns. To recognize defense mechanisms. And to acknowledge the client and validate them, validate their feelings, their emotions. To recognize who's talking. It might be the inner child, the mature adult, or another part of them. And then to engage with that part. To clarify anything not understood, to mirror, and to use appropriate self-disclosure. We want to also learn how to interrupt the client's story and have the confidence to do that. And to pay attention to our embodied reactions, to identify unconscious beliefs and their origin, both in the client as well as ourselves, and to use teaching stories when appropriate, when they can be effective with the client. To practice self-compassion and self-care, to be playful, and to know how to give the client a taste of victory and express gratitude throughout. So these are a summary of the 22 skills. In Module 1, we focus on 3 of these primary skills. The first is creating safety, probably the most important skill. The second is attuning to the client. And the third, invite openness. The original trauma, as you know, is disconnection from the self, caused by disconnection from the parents, from that lack of holding, that lack of mutual responsiveness. Therefore, because of this disconnection, trauma puts the nervous system into a recurrent defensive mode. And safety is when you can move people out of their defensive mode into their social engagement mode through connection. So we have a lot of barriers, protective barriers that are there for good reason. And we want to have enough safety that we can be vulnerable. For the infant to feel safe, it needs to be held physically and emotionally by the parent. Lack of safety or being held emotionally underlies the source of all trauma. So if the client senses, even unconsciously, that they're not safe, their defensive mechanisms will come into place. Because there was no relational context in which the fear and the pain of the child could be held when they were young. So in the therapeutic setting, we are that relational container. And for the pain to rise again, there has to be an enormous sense of safety. So the goal of therapy is to get people to feel open and secure at the same time. And if they close down, it's always a response or a sign that their vulnerability has not been protected. Somehow we're not keeping them safe. They don't feel safe. No human is ever invulnerable. And we can protect against the experience of vulnerability when it's too much to bear. There's this internal constriction that happens when the child or the person lacks a safe relational container. Children need the attuned reflection of the adult to validate their emotions and experience. So this is what we want to do in the therapeutic setting. Without that, the child limits their experience and expression of themselves. They shut down. They become defended against their own vulnerability. It's a coping mechanism because it's not safe to be vulnerable. And so that constriction occurs. But we can't be ourselves without being vulnerable, and there's no growth without vulnerability. So when clients can feel safe enough to be vulnerable, then they can grow. So this is where we want to be able to take them. And it comes through safety. People who are defended against vulnerability get stuck at the point where the defenses came into play when they were a child. If you're in a shell, you can only go as far as the walls of the shell will permit you to grow. And so we become prisoners of childhood. So that shell was originally there to protect us, so to keep us safe. But eventually as adults, those shells become walls that we need to transform into windows. The child develops strategies and behaviors then to avoid vulnerability, but the very avoidance of pain creates suffering because then we become disconnected from our true self. And here's a quote from the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. Whatever you do, don't shut up your pain, accept your pain, and remain vulnerable. And we then suppress our authenticity to avoid the pain of not being loved. And then our relationships lose their authenticity for the sake of attachment. When we move towards authenticity, we recreate the pain of losing or threatening an attachment. So it's difficult to be authentic because the fear is there that we're not going to be received. For the healing developmental force to be activated, the client really needs to be held. They need to be received. So this establishment of a deep connection in the present moment is very important. We need to form this safe relational container for the client. And the client has to trust that you're not going to hurt them and that you want the best for them. Otherwise, why would they open up? They have to be able to endure the suffering that is in the service of truth. So when we lead them to a painful place, which is necessary, they can accept it and recognize it is for their benefit. On the other hand, the client cannot feel safe if we are in turmoil. So if we're not in this place of equanimity within ourselves, then we can't regulate the client. So energetically, they will pick up on that. And when there's lack of safety, then people go into one of three modes to protect themselves. It's either the fight, or freeze modes. These are all defensive strategies when we're under stress. So in the office, the flight mode might look like they tune out, or they become distracted, they scatter their attention. The fight mode is to become defensive, perhaps argumentative, resistant. And the freeze mode is being passive with no engagement, being dumbstruck, perhaps. There's no learning in either of these modes, the fight, flight, or freeze state, and then we disconnect, we lose social engagement, and then there's no healing. So we need to pay attention and notice when either the client disconnects from us or when we become disconnected from the client, and then come back into the present moment, establish a connection, and that will establish safety. Skill number 2 is attunement. Attunement is being in tune with or on the same wavelength as the other person. And clients are in our office because they were not attuned with as children. The quality and mutual responsiveness of the parent-child relationship shapes the physiology of the brain, and it's that mutual responsiveness that is the attunement. Here's a beautiful, very important quote. The essential condition for a healthy development is the presence of nurturing, non-stressed, non-depressed, attuned, parenting caregivers. So that's necessary. The architecture of the brain is constructed through an ongoing process that begins before birth, continues into adulthood, and establishes either a sturdy or a fragile foundation for all the health, learning, and behavior that follows. The interactions of genes and experiences literally shapes the circuitry of the developing brain and is critically influenced by the mutual responsiveness of the adult-child relationships, particularly in the early childhood years. So it's this mutual responsiveness in the early childhood years that forms the circuitry in the brain, the healthy circuitry in the brain. It's been found that EEGs of infants who were the infants whose mothers were depressed, their EEGs corresponded to the EEGs of the mothers. So there was a linkage and attunement even to the depressed state of the mother. So the state of the mother affects the state of the child, because the infant uses the mature functions of the adult brain to regulate its own brain states. And so this is what will be happening also with our clients. Our brain state, our mood, our emotional state will help to regulate the state of the client. Attunement is locking into the child's wavelength and responding in a mutual way, and sharing their space and having the positive sense that it's okay, it'll be over, I'm here with you in this, and we can make it through. So this is how we want to relate to our client, attune with them, but don't reinforce their tragedy or drama. We have to be able to see that there's a way through, feel that there's a way through. If you don't know that it's going to be okay, we can't help the person. So the clients are 100% hooked into you, attuned to the state of your nervous system, and our nervous systems are co-regulating each other's. This is why it's so important that we have some sort of a practice to maintain our self-attunement, whether that's meditation or yoga or qigong or tai chi or walking in the woods. It's imperative that we have a practice for ourselves. Attunement also means that there are no difficult clients, there are only difficult therapists. So if we are experiencing that a client is being difficult, it means we're not regulated ourselves because they're not harmonizing with us, or we can't handle them. If we had this self-regulation, if we could calm ourselves and have that empathetic abiding presence, that equanimity, it wouldn't be a problem, whatever state that they're in for us. So when we're not seeing the client, they know that we're not seeing them. And they'll react to that. And any upset that we have or that they have is never about the present. It's always about the past. It's the child in the person, or it's the child in ourselves that's upset. So we want to attune with that inner child in the person. Attune with the inner child in the client. See the inner child, see where it's at, and attune with that. That's what needs the healing. And 100% accept it and be with a feeling. So we want to encourage the client to accept the feelings that they're in, the feelings that are in the body, the feelings that are arising. And we want to be okay with those feelings as well, and accept the feelings that are arising in ourselves. Witness from that place of being an empathetic, abiding witness with presence. When a feeling comes up, it's always about the unmetabolized childhood material. And so we don't analyze it, we stay with the feeling. So we encourage them to stay with the feeling, and we stay holding space for that feeling with them. Because this is what didn't happen when they were a young child and why the feelings stayed inside. So that's where we start. Both as a therapist and to encourage in the client, we want to allow this process of being attentive to what's happening in our heart, in our gut, in the whole body. Don't make it wrong. Don't try to make it go away. Accept it and stay with it patiently. Accept what's there. Help the client to accept what's going on without trying to push it away or repress it. And within ourselves, accept what's going on. Skill number 3 is, along the same lines, invite openness. So accept what's going on and invite even a deeper movement into that acceptance. So we invite the client to be totally present with whatever happens for them internally. If the client's upset, then we look at it. Usually if they're upset, it's because we're doing something that's not the way that it needs to be done for them. So we take responsibility for that. They're never wrong, just like the child's really not wrong. So now we'll look at, so that was a summary of the skills, and now we'll look at the stepping stones that we focus on in Module 1. There are a total of 17 stepping stones. Here they are. The first is faith in the client's own process. Actually, these are not the stepping stones. This is part of the compassionate inquiry approach. So we might call these the 4 pillars of compassionate inquiry. So faith in the client's own process, faith in your own intuition, being present to yourself as you conduct the inquiry, and taking responsibility for what arises in you during the session. Have compassion for yourself and for the client to whatever arises. So that would be pillar number 5. Be curious so that when something arises like anger, disappointment, hurt, or confusion, you inquire into it. And pillar number 7, understand that there are no problems, but only treasures to be explored. So how are we looking at things, as problems or treasures to be explored? And here's a short video with Gabor describing this.
As I said in the beginning yesterday, my concept of compassionate inquiry is not a method, it's an approach. And the approach is based on faith in the client's inner process, faith in your own intuition. It's based on you being present to yourself as you're conducting the inquiry. It's based on you taking responsibility for whatever arises in you and not making it about the other person or the client. It's based on compassion both for yourself and for the client, for whatever arises for either of you. It's based on curiosity, so that when something arises like anger, disappointment, hurt, confusion, you just get curious about it. Rather than making it into a problem, see it as a treasure to be explored. See it as something that is actually here to teach you something if you're willing to learn. And for that willingness to learn, you need to have the curiosity.
The process of compassion inquiry and how you engage with the client in the present moment has to arise from within you, from the inside, from the feeling level, from the heart. The more you come from your head, the less you're actually in the process. So it is a delicate dance between what the head knows and what arises spontaneously for you through your intuition and through a body knowing. And what arises spontaneously is really the goal that you bring to your interaction with whomever you're working with. The deep teaching is about the relationship and the kind of compassion you can generate for the client within that relationship. Healing has to do with experiencing the truth, not understanding it intellectually. So it's not about what we can say to the client or about the insights we give them. It's about the experience that they have. So our task is to open, broaden, and deepen the channels and capacity within ourselves to be present, to be aware, to be accepting, and to be compassionate. Every human behavior, thought, emotion, reaction reflects a desire to be loved or to love. It's quite simple. And Marshall Rosenberg, the author and founder of Nonviolent Communication, said that we make these communications into a tragic communication of an unmet need. And really all it is that we want to love or be loved. All their life, the client has been trying to have that need met. And even if they behave in the most aggressive, inhuman, and obnoxious fashion, there's always a reason for it. So our job is to see the need in the human being underneath their words and behavior, and then mirror back to them their true selves. Sometimes before we can practice compassion inquiry, there's a need for compassionate listening. Everyone has a tremendous need to be heard, and some people have never been heard. So we might want to give them space to talk and then really listen to understand them, invite them to tell us everything. Listen for as long as it takes, and give them unconditional, patient, compassionate listening, even before we do compassionate inquiry. First Nations people in particular have a tradition of narrative medicine, and this compassionate listening is a big part of the healing. In the compassion inquiry process, there are no steps, but just stepping stones. It's a cycle of steps. It's as though we're going through a marshy field. We need to find the stones to get across the field. It has to be a flow. It can't be prescribed. There are a total of 17 stepping stones. So we'll review the 17 stones and then focus on the first 6 after this. So the review of the 17 stones, first engage the client with an invitation. Ask them their name, address them by name, invite them to participate. Number 2, ask for permission to begin or continue. This enhances safety, diffuses threat, and empowers the client. Then ask specifically what they would like help with. What is their question? Why are they with you? If there's a problem, behavior, or addiction, what is the functionality of it? What is it doing for them? Ask the client to describe a situation without interpretation. What happened or is happening? What's the trigger? He said, she said. What's the reality? And then bring the client into the bodily experience of the present moment. Get them into the body. And give them space to experience and identify the sensation or the feeling that's present in the body, even if they can't talk about it. And as they speak, if they do talk about it, help them to distinguish between a feeling and a perception or an interpretation, and always go to the feeling that it's underneath the perception or interpretation. And then ask whenever it's appropriate, is this the first time that you've experienced this? Don't make it about the current situation, but show that its origins go far, far back. Ask about what experiences in childhood might have induced that feeling, and find the earliest one. Then ask the client who they talked to at that time. Who did they tell about that? If not their parents, why not? And help them to remember their childhood and bring forth repressed feelings by asking them to imagine a child of a similar age experiencing what they experienced as a child. What would that child feel? Ask if it was their child experiencing these emotions at that age, who would they want them to talk to? And if the child did not talk to their parents, what would be the reason? Because this must have been their reason too. And ask them to name the reason. Bring the client's awareness to understanding their behavior as a coping mechanism without judging it. And ask them what their behavior or substance gives them, and if this is a normal human need. Help them to be more compassionate towards themselves and move away from making themselves wrong. And ask the client to identify the underlying belief that they created about themselves at that time when something occurred as a child, and challenge that belief by examining other possible reasons why a person might have said or done something that upset the client, either in the present time, the current trigger, or when they were a child, or both. Bring the client's current issue back to them, back to the client. It's not about somebody else, and encourage 100% responsibility, which includes action, meaning they're responsible for choosing the way that they interpret or react to whatever is going on. And they can act in a fluid way rather than a constricted way. See the client for their possibility, help them reframe their perceptions to be more in line with present reality, and affirm what they have already achieved or demonstrated, and then thank the client for the interaction. So that's a quick review of the 17 stepping stones. And you'll notice these happen at various times when you see Gabor model compassion inquiry. It's not meant to be a linear progression, and you might have to review one or two stepping stones several times in the session. But that gives you a sense of what the components are in the line of inquiry. Now we'll focus a little bit more on stepping stones 1 to 6, and these are the ones that we'd like you to practice in Module 1. The first is to engage the client with an invitation, which means address them by their name. Engage with eye contact, as long as they're comfortable with eye contact. Feel into one another's presence. Say something or gestures somehow so that you make contact. There's a connection. You maintain a connection, and then give them your full attention. Stepping stone number 2. Always ask for permission to begin compassion inquiry, and even if you are in the process of practicing compassion inquiry, ask for permission to continue if the client seems uncomfortable. And part of this permission is to invite them to let you know at any point if they're uncomfortable, to tell you that they want to stop, and that that's under their control, not yours. So that it's always the client in the lead rather than us. And that's very important to maintain safety. So we don't assume we can continue and barrel through these 17 stepping stones, but we are constantly responsive to the client's mood, to their need, to their emotions, to the feelings, and we stop if they need us to. So we keep checking in with the person, and we say, as soon as it gets uncomfortable or you wish to stop, please let me know. This allows the client to be in the position of power. We're working with them, we're not working on them, so that keeps them feeling safe. We pay attention to the cues they're giving us. We notice any resistance or stress or overwhelm, and that might be through their body language or their tone of voice or the position in which they're sitting. And at all costs, we keep them safe. Stepping stone number 3, we ask the client what specifically they would like help with if it's not unclear. We don't assume that we know or that we're going to tell them what they need help with. We want it to come from them. And some people have a very difficult time expressing that. And so we patiently keep asking until they come out with a clear response. So some of the questions might be, what is the actual problem, dilemma, or question that you'd like help with? What would you like to get from this conversation? What was your intention in coming to see me? Stepping stone number 4. If there's a problem, behavior, or addiction, ask what the functionality of it is. We can ask, what is it doing for you? What's right about it? And an addiction involves 4 components. The first is there's a craving that needs to be satisfied. The second, when that craving is satisfied, there's a temporary relief or pleasure. The third, it has negative consequences. And the fourth, the person is unable to give it up. So those 4 conditions qualify as an addiction. But ultimately, the addiction is not the problem, but is sometimes a brilliant attempt to solve a problem. And it's the underlying pain that's the problem. So we need to find out what function the addiction serves for the client. And after we understand that function, we can get to the pain. Stepping stone number 5 is to ask the client to describe a situation that is bothering them without interpreting the situation. So we stay with what actually happened. We don't let them go on for a long time with a story or an interpretation or an opinion. We go into the details of what actually happened. And if they give us an interpretation, it might sound like I was rejected or I was abused or he or she belittled me. And those are not true feelings, they're perceptions or interpretations. So we make the client aware of that and keep probing to get to the feeling. We get to the feeling by bringing the client into the bodily experience of the present moment. Because connection to the self and connection to the body, connection to the emotions is always available in the present moment. It's not available any other time, but now. So we can access this present moment experience through the senses, through seeing, through hearing, through feeling, smelling, tasting what is right now. But the most helpful way in compassion inquiry is through feeling, through body sensations and emotions, and being in touch with gut feelings. So that's what we're creating space for the client to experience. Primarily the body sensations, the emotions, and anything that comes from the gut.
Now, so if we're going to talk about steps, then notice that the person starts speaking, but very quickly, not dogmatically and necessarily always, but if I sense that there's something going on with them, I'll ask them to get into the present moment, to get out of their heads and get into their bodies. Just what's going on here right now. That almost inevitably leads to some kind of a shift. Because being up here and being in the story is the way that we escape from the discomfort. That's what we've done all our lives. So while we're, again, keeping in mind that the aim of therapy is to promote the in the present self. That has to involve the body.
So as Gabor says, we don't engage with their ideas because ideas will not promote their process. Instead, we might ask about their relationships. And whenever we notice a shift, we get them into the present, out of their head, into the body. Because being in our head is how we escape from discomfort, and we've done this all our lives. Here are now some of the guidelines for practicing compassionate inquiry. It's a summary of the do's and don'ts. Some of the do's: the first, always ask for permission from them to engage in a conversation, remain grounded and compassionate throughout, maintain awareness and presence, go straight into the issue without forcing it, relinquish any need for the client to get it, work with your own reactions, notice the client's beliefs and that they're always stating something about themselves. Challenge those beliefs by proving them false based on what's happening in the moment, not by talking them out of it, but based on the reality of the moment. Help the client distinguish the difference between what actually happened to them as a child and their interpretation of what happened. Pay attention to the words as they reveal who they think they are, and accept the parts of the client and feelings they're having that they reject, and help them be more compassionate towards themselves. Validate their emotions and experience, stay comfortable and relaxed, take your cues from the client, listen to their words and mirror them back to be sure they are true. And now for what not to do. Don't get frustrated if they don't get it. Don't force your own agenda. Don't push them in any way. Don't do anything to make them feel threatened. Don't try to change them. Don't try to be right. Don't engage with their ideas. Take them into the bodily experience of the present moment, into their sensations and feelings. Don't give them advice. And that concludes the practice section of Module 1.